Hi, everyone. So we're here because since we've been helping my dad through the Bredesen Protocol all these years, I've gotten asked many different questions, but one question in particular that has come up repeatedly over the years has been, where are these patients that have reversed their Alzheimer's, their symptoms of Alzheimer's with Bredesen's protocol? So today with us, we have Frank McNear, who did just that. Frank is one of the first pioneers in this area that reverses Alzheimer's disease and its associated cognitive decline through the help of Dr. Dale Bredesen and the Bredesen Protocol. Before that, Frank was a successful entrepreneur. He's a devoted husband to his wife, Pat, who he had once been the caretaker for when she had suffered a debilitating stroke years ago. He's a father, grandfather, and now author. He was just featured in Dr. Bredesen's third book, The First Survivors of Alzheimer's. Um, but more importantly, among his other written works, he's written two amazing books, Defeating Dementia and his most recent release, Taking Care of the Caretakers. He's a hero in my household and has been a constant source of inspiration to me, my dad, and the many, many people his message has reached. He's also got a great sense of humor and is overall such an amazing human being. And I think you'll really like what Frank has to say today for us. So, Frank, I really appreciate you coming on for our listeners. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your story. And I think people will find it's a much needed story to hear. So, Frank, how are you doing?
Well, good. And the first thing I want to do is thank you for asking me to come on here. I feel like I'm one of the luckiest guys in the world. I really do. And nothing makes me happier than get to sit down with somebody that's struggling with Alzheimer's, either with themselves or somebody they love, and try and give them a little bit of hope. And so it's great to be here and be glad to answer your questions.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Frank. That's great. And yeah, I mean, we'll get right to it. I mean, can you please share with our listeners what you were officially diagnosed with and when that was?
Well, I think it was either 2011 or 2012. I wouldn't bet my life on it. Things were pretty hazy back then, but my original diagnosis was mild cognitive impairment.
Yeah.
And the one thing I'd like to tell you about mild cognitive impairment is there's absolutely nothing that's mild about it. It's scary, it's frightening, it is debilitating. And I guess compared to like stage 4, 5, 6 Alzheimer's, it is mild, but boy, it doesn't seem like it when you're going through with it. That
Yeah.
was my first diagnosis. In 2014, I applied for Social Security disability because I couldn't work anymore.
Yeah.
I pretty much bankrupted a business that I'd had for 25 years, trying to run it with dementia. And
Yeah.
so, anyway, I filed for that claim. And the first thing they do when you file for disability in the United States is they assign you to a doctor whose job is to try and debunk your claim,
Yeah.
trying to
Right.
give you a thorough examination and tell you that you're not really qualified.
Yeah.
So that doctor, after about a 90-minute session, was the first doctor that ever put it on paper that I had early onset Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
And that was in 2014.
Got it. Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, before the SSDI claim and you seeking out medical help, what were some of the symptoms that you could perceive um you needed to get help about, you know?
Well, I'll tell you, there was a lot of years in my early 50s when I was having definite problems, but I was in denial about it. I was having conversations that I didn't remember.
Hmm.
And I thought employees of mine were making stuff up that I had said, taking advantage of me.
Yeah.
Uh, in 2001, we moved from the Caribbean we bought a house in Massachusetts, and my plan was to go to graduate school. I wanted to be a child psychologist. And so I was going to graduate school on the weekends, and during the week, I was working at a therapeutic boarding school for high IQ kids with behavior problems. So all of a sudden, I was in a relatively unfamiliar milieu for myself. And it was only a year and a half later that I became the executive director, at which point I was now on the phone almost constantly with students in my office, students' parents calling me at all hours of the night, lawyers calling, funding sources calling, and parents, like 75, 80 parents. And it was just one conversation after another. And I realized sometimes I wasn't even holding the conversation while it was happening. And I used to dread on Parents' Weekend when they would all show up on campus 3 times a week, and I would have to remember them all. So my first official move as executive director was everybody wears an ID badge on those weekends.
Right.
But that was when it started, and I just put it off to, I don't know what I put it off to. I put it off to stress, I guess. And
Yeah.
But as far as going to be a child psychologist, I got all the way through my master's program up until I was in the middle of my last class. It was a grief class,
Yeah.
and it occurred to me, if I become a child psychiatrist, there's no way from week to week when I'm seeing clients that I'm going to remember what their story is. There's no way.
Yeah.
And I knew I could take notes right, but I thought that would be really cheesy, and I didn't think it'd be fair to the kids.
Yeah.
So that was my first distinct, other than losing all my money before I went to the States.
Yeah.
Other than that, that was my first loss. First consequence I had for my memory, and it hurt because I really wanted to do it, and I thought I'd be really good at it.
Right.
So it started there, and it just kept getting worse and worse and worse, and more embarrassed. I got to a point where I didn't like to go out anymore. Like I used to love to go sailing. I used to go sailing every weekend down the Caribbean. In 2006, we moved back to the Caribbean. I quit that job at the school, and I stopped going sailing because I couldn't remember my way around a yacht. I just couldn't remember my way around it. I couldn't remember how to tie off a basic cleat on a sailboat.
Wow.
I stopped going to art shows because I knew I'd run into people that I wouldn't remember.
Yeah.
Just kept getting worse and worse. And finally, 2 things happened that made me say, you got to get help. And one of the reasons I never did get help is because I was convinced that Alzheimer's was fatal. I was pretty sure I had Alzheimer's.
Yep.
And as far as I was concerned, there was one way out, and it wasn't recovery.
Right.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was kind of it. I mean, I'll give you one story of when it really was bad.
Yeah.
It used to take me about 15 minutes to get out of my house in the morning to go to work. I couldn't find my phone, couldn't find my telephone, couldn't find my keys. I found my phone once in the freezer in the kitchen.
Yeah.
So anyway, one morning I go out, and we had a narrow driveway, and my wife's SUV was parked behind mine, and there wasn't room to go around.
Yeah.
So I had to go back inside to get her keys and come out and move her car. I went inside, I got her keys, I come outside, like 3 minutes later, right?
Yeah.
I get in my car and back into forgetting that she was behind me and crashed in her front end. And I said, that the writing's on the wall.
Yeah.
So I started looking for help.
Yeah. Yeah. I can understand that. Yeah, it's something where, I can't imagine what you must have felt when you were ready to seek out help. When you did get the help, and you had a professional tell you the diagnosis, that initial one, mild cognitive impairment, what were your initial thoughts on his diagnosis?
Well, like I said earlier, what I was going through, there was nothing mild about it.
Yeah.
And this doctor was Harvard undergrad, Harvard Medical School. And I was seeing him I was living on St. Croix, but I'd fly over to St. Thomas to see him because I didn't want anybody in St. Croix to know I was seeing a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
And he used to tell me there's no way you have Alzheimer's. If you can find your way by yourself from St. Croix to my office every Wednesday, you do not have Alzheimer's. And I was thinking, he doesn't know what he's talking about. I knew more about Alzheimer's by then than he did. I said, yeah, that'd be true if I had stage 5, probably, but I don't. I'm early in the game here, I hope.
Right.
And that was my reaction.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
It's amazing. It's amazing. Yeah, no, there is a lot of gradients within that diagnosis. And you definitely, fortunately, you caught it early on, and then you find Dr. Bredesen. I mean, how did you get on to Dr. Bredesen and his work?
it was as I don't want to sound religious because I'm not religious, but I really believe it was the grace of God that I found out.
Yeah.
I was in San Miguel having lunch with some friends, and there was a table next to us of people, old people, I say, but I was thinking about that this morning. They weren't any older than we were, but they looked old to me. And anyway, I was listening into their conversation, and they were talking. It was 2014, and Bredesen's first study had just been released, and they were talking about it. And I heard 9 out of 10 cases had been reversed, and I said, I need to talk to this guy. I need to get him on the phone. And I'm thinking, how am I ever going to get him on the phone? He's probably one of the most famous doctors in the world right now. But it occurred to me that for several years I took notes about my dementia, what was happening when crazy stuff would happen. Like when I would go into a gas station and give them $25 to put in the tank and drive away, and 5 minutes later realize I hadn't put the gas in my car, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I would stop and I would write it down. And when I get home, I'd put it in the computer.
Yeah.
Because I was thinking I was going to write this book called Descent into Dementia
Yeah.
and track my demise.
Yeah.
And I finally realized along the way that it was getting so depressing, nobody in the world would want to read it. So I shelved it.
Yeah.
But when I heard about Dr. Bredesen, I thought, well, maybe my in with him could be I could tell his secretary I'm writing a book about dementia.
Yeah.
I want to talk to her.
Yes.
And she was a really great secretary. It took me 6 or 7 months before I finally got through her wall and got to speak to him.
Yeah.
And when she put me on, when she gave me the phone, she said, I hope you know what you want to say, Mr. McNear, because this is one of the most famous doctors in the world right now. He's on the phone constantly. He can't even work anymore. He's on the phone so much. You'll be lucky if you get 5 or 10 minutes talking to him. So please, I hope you know what you want to say. So it was a Friday afternoon, and he got on the phone. Real pleasant guy. We were on the phone for almost 40 minutes. He asked me a lot of questions my own doctors had never asked me. He was excited about the fact that when I first saw his study, the 2014 study, I started doing some of that stuff. Not rigorously like I do now, but I started doing some of that stuff. And so anyway, he outlined the program to me. He told me about the 36 holes in the roof that I saw you did a podcast on another day. And he just told me what was involved. And he gave me hope. I hadn't had hope in forever. But I want to tell you, when I met him, he was giving a presentation to about 200 or 300 people that were affected by dementia and Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
And so I fly from Mexico to Northern California, which was a challenge because I was really, really sick.
Yeah.
And in the process, I left my favorite hat on an airplane. But what also happened was, I don't know if you've ever been on a plane where at the last minute the stewardess comes down the aisle with a passenger and tells some clown. Well, that was me.
Yeah.
Like 10, 15 minutes before the plane was leaving, I had to get up. That's why I lost my hat.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it was a challenge, and during his presentation, after he spoke, a woman spoke, and name was Julie.
Yeah.
And Calls herself Julie G now just because she was trying to maintain a little bit of anonymity.
Yeah.
But her story was just like mine. She lived in a small town for many, many years and was getting lost in it, just like I was down on St. Croix. She was running into people on the street that she'd known forever and couldn't remember even who they were. I had that exact same experience more than once. And she was up there giving this talk, and she was so coherent and so relaxed and so like not sick that just blew my mind.
Yeah.
I talked to her when the thing was over, and we're still in contact. And I love her to death. She's been a great ambassador for Bredesen's Protocol.
Yeah.
And then when it was time to meet him, he told me when I first met him. The first thing I want to tell you is when I met him, I said, "Hi, I'm Mr. McNear." And he said, "Hi, I'm Dale. Call me Dale."
That's
And
awesome.
I'm so used to arrogant doctors that think that you're supposed to bow before them. I was like, this guy's for real, man. This guy has some humility.
Yeah.
And he told me before the thing started, he said, "Now listen, there's going to be a lot of guys at my office early so I can get you in first." And he did. And that's when he explained it to me. And that's when I met Julie. And that's when I had hope for the first time. That was in 2015. I had given up.
Yeah.
By 11, I thought it was over 2011.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, I went home and I started practicing what he had told me and, did some more research. Unfortunately, none of his books had been published by then, so I was a little bit on my own.
Yeah.
But he answered a lot of questions for me, and I had hope. And I went home and I told my wife, and it gave her hope.
Yeah.
And that's that. Yeah.
Yeah. That's amazing. That's
The rest is
amazing. Yeah. You know, it's for you to, take off from from Mexico at that point to California, um, and then meet them and then come back. What were your wife's first thoughts when you came back and you kind of, gave her the good news, this new gospel?
I can't begin to think what she was thinking. I don't know. She
Yeah.
went through hell.
Yeah.
When I was in the business of running my business into the ground, she knew something was wrong.
Yeah.
And she kept saying, "You're borrowing money to make your payroll. That's not a successful business." And I go, "You don't understand a business plan." Because what I was doing was borrowing from my IRA to make payroll,
Yeah.
and by the time all the payrolls were made and the next check came in, it gave me the illusion of being above water. But in fact, what I was doing was draining my IRA before I was even old enough to take a legitimate deposit,
Wow.
withdrawal.
Yeah.
So I don't know what she was thinking, but she sure snapped right to it.
Yeah.
And, she looked into what the diet was and started figuring out ways to find the things that I needed, and particularly the supplements,
Yeah.
and where to find them affordably.
Yeah.
And she's been supportive ever since. And she, a lot of times, hasn't happened lately, but a lot of times I would forget
Yeah.
something that a normal person might forget,
Yeah.
And I'd say, "Pat, I think it's coming back." And she'd say, "You're crazy. You're
Yeah.
73 years old. Everybody forgets stuff,"
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
was important to me.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
I did have a relapse,
Yeah.
and it was only when I was about a year into it,
Yeah.
and I was on a sidewalk with a bunch of people, and this woman who I didn't even know said, "How much do you weigh anyway?" Because I had lost about 40, 45 pounds.
Wow.
And I told her from change of diet, I stopped eating a quarter and a half of ice cream every night. That helped in that process.
Yeah.
But I told her, and then I weighed 135 pounds, and she went like this. She pointed her finger at me and she goes, "No man should weigh 135 pounds."
Oh,
And my ego's going,
yeah. Oh boy.
and like a fool, I listened to her like it was her business, right?
Right.
And I was scheduled for a trip up to the border to do something. I forget what. and I was going to be up there for 3 days. And I said, well, I'm going to be up there 3 days. I'm going to gain 5 pounds. So I spent 3 days. I must have ate probably 10 or 11 of those giant cinnamon rolls.
Yeah.
I had half a dozen milkshakes. I
Yeah.
bought a thing of peanut butter this high
Yeah.
and a giant bag of red licorice sticks
Yeah.
and used them as a spoon.
Yeah.
And I did a bunch, and I gained the 5 pounds.
Yeah.
And
I
I
bet you
came
did.
home. And for some reason, when I came home, I stopped exercising, which is a huge part of my protocol. I don't know. I don't know if they were tied together or what.
Mhm.
And then I started slacking off on the supplements. And then the next thing I knew, I couldn't hold a thought in the time it took to cross a room.
Yeah.
And it scared the shit out of me.
Yeah.
And at that time, I was being filmed for a documentary by this couple from Los Angeles. The
Yeah.
producer was a very famous uh, Hollywood producer back in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
Really big, important guy.
Yeah.
And his girlfriend was the videographer.
Yeah.
And they were filming me for this documentary about people like myself.
Yeah.
And I called them. And I got a hold of the girl, Leah, and I told her what was happening. And she says, "You need to speak to my husband." So she put him on the phone, and I told him my dilemma. And he said, "Listen, you need to know we talk to people that are on this protocol every day, hours on end, and probably a third of them did exactly what you did at some point.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to maintain all the components." He said, "You just need to know that almost all of them regain their cognition."
That's awesome.
And I was so relieved to hear that because I thought I had lost it for good.
Yeah.
And it was harder the second time to get it back, but I did get it back.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. That's amazing. That's amazing. And it's you know, you're pointing out something that we'll definitely get into. I mean, it is a comprehensive protocol. It's amazing, and it's so great that it's here. There's a solution. People like yourself have been able to do what many neurologists have said is not possible. Um, but it takes some work, and there's a lot of moving pieces. And I think your wife has been such a huge, uh, instrumental part of all of this, because it really does kind of take a team. At least a team of two. You know, um,
yeah,
but but
better a team of 5 or 6 or 7 or 8, but
yeah.
you're right.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Um, that was kind of like you had the relapse, but you were able to regain it. But before your relapse, when you kind of sunk your teeth into it, when you got back, I mean, how did you how did you initially feel after a few weeks on the protocol?
Well, it was more than a few weeks.
Yeah.
Uh, I felt like a guy that had been given a second chance at life because my life wasn't worth 2 cents before I got on the protocol.
Yeah.
It was a living nightmare on a day by day basis.
Yeah.
And I had no hope for the future. And all of a sudden, I could envision a future, and I could envision a different ending for my book.
Yeah.
uh, I could see how descent into dementia could morph into defeating dementia, which it did.
Yeah.
And that book is sold in 15 countries. And you would think it's hundreds of thousands of copies, 15. It's not. But
Yeah.
for a self published book, it was very successful.
Yeah.
And one of the best things about it is that it put me in contact with people all over the world because I
Absolutely.
make myself available.
Yeah.
I try to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I felt pretty goddamn good. And I also was apprehensive, you know.
Yeah. 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 No, that's great. I mean, I mean, one of the people you reached was me, and my family. We got your book, and it was, I had been introduced to Bredesen through his first book, End of Alzheimer's. And then a few years later, your book was just another reinforcing, um, just a great reinforcement that there are people working the system and there are people achieving the results. And, the studies showed it, but, your book was such a great inspiration to us and had some really great practical points. And, we're going to definitely put the link to your book in the description for this interview as well, because it's a book that I feel like most people, with all the people that have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, I feel like there's a short list of books that every family should have if they've had a family history of dementia or Alzheimer's. And obviously, one of them has to be Bredesen's End of Alzheimer's. And I really feel like Defeating Dementia has to be right up there with it because, I mean, how many do we know of any other people who've been able to reverse Alzheimer's and then go on and write out a book to help other people do just the same thing? So, really grateful that you wrote that book. And if it's not in the hundreds of thousands now, it sure will be pretty shortly. So that's awesome. You said it was more than a few weeks. How long do you think it was that it took for you to feel like you were starting to turn the corner with the protocol?
It's really hard to answer. Really hard to answer.
Yeah.
At that point, I was no longer taking notes. I was just doing what I needed to do. And, it's a really vague period in my life. I mean, really vague. Alzheimer's did not, I mean, the protocol did not restore my memory of everything I ever did in my whole life.
Hmm.
And in fact, I have a lot of memories that are gone forever, which is sad, but
Yeah.
I can live with it, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But it was months. It was several months.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that helped me feel better relatively soon was one of the main stressors for people that can lead to cognitive issues is stress.
Yeah.
And when we sold our house, we had two houses, one in the Caribbean and one in the Berkshires in Massachusetts. And when I sold the second one, which was the one in the islands, it was a real burden off my shoulders because I was like, we had it rented, but I'm like, what are we going to do if there's another hurricane? Am I in any kind of condition to go down there and supervise a hurricane rebuild, which had done several times when I was in business.
Yeah.
But in my condition, it just seemed like overwhelming.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Um, you know, everybody's protocol is a little bit different, and from everything, speaking to other people and everything I've studied, it definitely seems like different people have uh, different parts of the protocol that they seem to uh, really benefit a whole lot more from than other parts of the protocol. And that kind of goes back to Bredesen's whole, the type 1, type 2, type 3, the inflammatory, the atrophic, the different types of Alzheimer's, the way they show up, the toxic. What for you, what do you feel made the biggest difference in your protocol?
Eliminating stress, treating my depression, and changing my diet and starting exercise, none of which I was doing any of that. Uh, I
Wow.
was a guy that never had a salad unless he was forced into it.
Yeah.
I just never ate vegetables. I ate junk food by the truckload. I yeah, the diet, and that's been the hardest part for me still. Uh, my wife continues to make really appropriate meals for me, but San Miguel's got a bakery on every corner, and they really know how to make things that I really like. And
Yeah.
I sometimes I have to pray about not walking in them.
Yeah.
And every once in a while, I told you this yesterday, I think.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, it's like birthday or Christmas or whatever, and I'll have a piece of cake. I got to be on high alert to not have another piece the next day, and it's hard. It is hard,
Yeah.
and I never realized how much I like sugar and bread until I got on this protocol.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, one a big component of my protocol for the last 8 years has been I was walking 10,000 steps a day in
Yeah.
San Miguel, which is a town that was built in the 1700s, and the streets are cobblestone, and the sidewalks are treacherous. They're treacherous.
Yeah.
Sometimes they disappear under your feet. I don't know how to describe it, but you'll be walking along, and all of a sudden there's a step missing, and all of a sudden you're jammed your back. Anyway, but I did that for like 8 years, and I've had chronic back pain for like the last 15 years.
Yeah.
And it started getting worse and worse and worse. And I just spent 2 months up in Boston looking into surgery.
Mm.
And one of the things they told me, they don't want to do the surgery because they're afraid 9 hours of anesthesia is going to set my cognition back, way back, and it may not ever recover. They have data on that.
Yeah.
One of the things they told me, you got to stop walking. You can't be walking on those streets and sidewalks.
Wow.
Which I knew it. I mean, by the time I was up in Boston, my 10,000 steps had shrunk to probably 6,000.
Right.
And sometimes even 6,000 was really, really challenging.
Yeah.
So now I'm looking for a stationary bike, which is what they suggested I started using.
Yeah.
And so far, we haven't found one. So, yeah.
All right. All right. Well, I've got one in the garage if you need me to send it over to you. I don't know about the packaging. We'll figure that piece out. But yeah, definitely something more low impact would probably be better. But that's diet, exercise, reducing stress. That's huge. And
A lot of people that I tell the protocol about,
yeah,
we get as far as the point where you're not really supposed to eat sugar,
yeah,
and they're out.
I know.
I had a friend who I was telling about it a few years ago. And when I got to the sugar part, he said, I'm not going to give up my comfort food. And you know what? 3 years later, he was dead.
Oh,
But he's
man.
still eating his peanut butter sandwiches and shit.
It's so hard,
So,
Frank. Yeah, it's so hard. I mean, sh
but
sugar,
it's doable. When
it
your
is.
brain's on the line, it's doable.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And I'll
Absolutely.
tell you another theory I have. I read this somewhere and I believe it. All the different parts of the protocol,
Yeah.
if I do all of them at 90%,
Yeah.
I'm okay. Doesn't
Yeah.
have to be 100%.
That's it.
So, which
Yeah,
I
that's it.
think most people are afraid that I can't live like that forever.
Right.
But it becomes manageable. And my wife has taught me how to like vegetables.
Yeah. Well,
She's
that's what I
come
was
up
going
with
to
a lot
ask
of
you.
good recipes.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's what I was going to ask you. I mean, what would you say is was or still is the biggest challenge in the protocol? Is it the diet piece? Is it certain dietary things to be compliant with?
Yeah, that's it for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she's been enormously helpful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you
Absolutely.
know, when I do have a piece of cake, what I tell myself is, all right, well, if I'm going to live to be 90, I don't want to live like I'm deprived my whole life of things that I like.
Yeah.
It's called quality of life. So if
Absolutely.
I can get away with having 4 or 5 pieces of cake in the course of a year, I'm good with that.
Yeah.
And so far, my brain is.
Yeah.
But I will never forget my experience up in Laredo at the border and let it get out of control.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Um, you know, your wife's been a big part of all this. I'm assuming that she's with all the cooking she's been doing and all the help she's given you, I'm assuming she's doing a little bit of the protocol herself.
Very little. She's doing better. She's doing better. She's doing a lot better.
Yeah.
But like, she still won't eat a piece of salmon. She knows how to cook it and she knows how to make it taste really good, but she doesn't like it.
Yeah.
But yeah, and she's exercising more than she ever did before,
Yeah.
and
That's great. Yeah.
she's
I mean,
amazing. I mean, 35 years ago, we never thought she'd be able to do anything.
well, I was going to
That
ask you.
stroke she had was, kick ass deal.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. I mean, she's put in all this work with you over the years, especially, the early years when you first got diagnosed, but you had been her caretaker years back. Can you talk about
For
that a
years.
little bit? Yeah.
Uh, well, one of the reasons we wrote the book about taking care of the caretakers is because we both have experienced both being caretakers and being taken care of.
Yeah.
And I personally am very aware of how stressful it is to be a caretaker.
Yeah.
How I struggle with anger sometimes, and self doubt, and frustration, and fear, and the whole gamut of emotions that come with that. And it's sad to say, but I've heard caretakers express some pretty ugly emotions around the process of caretaking.
Yeah.
And that was not our experience. Although there was a long period where I was a pretty angry guy. And it wasn't that long, but it was a few months anyway.
Yeah.
So we've got the experience of being taken care of and the experience of taking care of each other. And so we've got a kind of a unique perspective on it, I think. And we thought we had something worth sharing. The good news about it is we've been together 48 years, and the last 8 or 9 have been the best years of our marriage.
That's amazing.
It is amazing. It amazes. I'm amazed that she still loves me, and she does. She tells me like 15 times a week how much she loves me, and it's good to hear. It's freaking good to hear.
Hey, love is good.
So
Yeah.
love
Yeah.
is very good.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely. And especially with caretaking, uh, I'm I'm so grateful that you wrote this most recent book, The Taking Care of the Caretakers. It's just another great work. You guys taking what you've had to experience for years and packaging it up in a helpful resource to help other people with something right now that every day, every week, every month, we're having more and more cases of Alzheimer's being diagnosed, dementia being diagnosed, but we have all sorts of cases of chronic diseases that are kind of taking people out at the knees. And more of us family members are having to become caretakers. And it's kind of a subject that doesn't get a whole lot of recognition or hasn't. Um, and it's not an easy responsibility. There's so many things to juggle. And I think one of the best things that I got from your book is this this priority to make sure to prioritize yourself as a caretaker and not let yourself, completely burn, not let yourself get completely burnt out because then, I mean, what can you give the person you're taking care of, So um this is something that needs a lot more recognition going forward because everywhere I look, I mean, look, I'm 33 and I'm a caretaker, you know, but it's something that's kind of it's growing, by the day. So these tools, these resources, this information, needs to be learned, and more people need to know the message. So that's another book. We're going to have a link to the description below. And Frank, actually, can you tell us for both of those books, what's the best place to go and get those books, would you say?
The best place, it's in very few bookstores, but it's in some, is Amazon.
Okay. Okay.
It's the place to get it.
All right.
And a lot of major bookstores will order it for you, most of them, chain
Yep.
bookstores.
Awesome. Awesome.
And so I
Well,
just want, when Pat had her stroke, it was 1985,
yeah.
and I was 36 years old, I guess.
Wow.
There was nothing for caretakers, nothing. Dude, nobody even told us there was such a, I don't even know if they had them back then, but nobody told us they had rehabs for people that had strokes. I mean, we were down in St. Croix. Uh, thank God I have a really good support group. I always have. But yeah, I mean, it was rough. It was rough.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
But it worked out. She's fine now. Most people now would never guess she ever had a stroke.
yeah. It's amazing. It's a very rare thing. I've never really heard of something like that where, one spouse is a caretaker to the other spouse, and then years later, the roles reverse. It's definitely something that's, so unique, and um it, it it's something that lends itself really well to writing a book about, because you guys got that experience. What in that experience of you taking care of Pat, is there anything that you took from that then helped you with your early path when you got diagnosed with MCI and then early on Alzheimer's?
Well, one thing I knew when I was getting sick, and when I was sick, I knew that she was not going anywhere. I knew that she would support me until the very last day. I knew I would never be alone in my struggle, and uh, and she's still that way today.
Yeah.
And that meant the world to me. It still does. It still
Yeah.
does. You know, the protocol did not restore me to perfect cognitive health. Like the truth of the matter is, if I get really stressed, I struggle. Not often, but occasionally when I'm in a stressful situation. And when that happens, what used to when that used to happen, I would think the protocol is not working.
Yeah.
Protocol is not working. And what I know now is when that happens, you got to figure out, well, what are you so stressed about, and how are you going to deal with it?
Yeah.
And I have my ways of dealing with it. And basically, my life was pretty stress free until you came along.
Sorry about that, Frank.
No, yesterday I was feeling stressed out and I slept on it and I woke up and I go, this is a great opportunity to maybe help somebody.
Yeah.
And the stress kind of like disappeared.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that,
And it
Frank.
helps me. It helps me.
Yeah.
Reaffirms to myself what I'm doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that, Frank. And yeah, I mean, this is helping a lot of people, because it's a message, it's a story that needs to be heard, and there are a lot of people with doubts, trepidations, um, about the protocol for a lot of different reasons. And this is one of the last things I wanted to ask you is something you brought up in our call yesterday, and it's such a really great point. And you're right. There is this doubt. There is this hesitancy that people will get because they've heard that the protocol can be expensive, right? And
Right.
you have a different approach. You have a different opinion on that. Can you expand on that?
Well, I can tell you I've spent very little money on this protocol, with the exception of maybe we might spend a little more money on food than we used to, but not much. But I've been very lucky. And the fact that I had personal contact with Dale, with Dr. Bredesen, is like was a lifesaver for me. We also met 4 years ago. We met in Dallas at one of his clinics. And I was still not in a position to spend $1,900 on lab work. And he asked me if I'd gotten it done yet, and I said no. And I told him why. He said, well, you can get it done here. And I said, well, your insurance cover? And he said, I don't think so, but I will. So
Wow.
he paid for it. So I
Wow.
was lucky with that. But how I started practicing this protocol is something that most people shouldn't do. I looked at all the case studies. There was 3 of them in the original study. They had all done pretty much the same stuff, but they had all taken different supplements.
Yeah.
And I went through the list and I said, well, which ones did all 3 of them take? And I came up with a list of 8 or 9 of them, and that's what I started taking.
Yeah.
And it worked. I'll
Yeah.
tell you though, the reason you should get tested first, if you possibly can, is because I took vitamin B12 for 5 years,
Mm.
every single day. And when Bredesen did that blood work, the only thing I was deficient in was vitamin B12.
Wow.
And I asked the doctor that ran the clinic, I said, how can that be? I
Yeah.
take it every day. And she said, because you have the APOE34 genome,
Yeah.
and as such, you cannot, your body will not process regular B12. You need methylated B12, which I've been taking ever since. How
Yeah.
much money would that information have saved me? 5 or 6 years of taking it every
Yeah.
day? I don't know, but it was substantial.
Yeah.
But that's where I started.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
And I'm just like, oh, another thing is there, a lot of times you hear you need to have a coach.
Yeah.
And I know you're your dad's coach, as far as I know. And Pat was my coach. And that's all I needed. Somebody that loved me with all their heart, that was willing to take the time and understand the protocol and help me do it and keep on my back in a loving way to make sure I kept doing it. And that's all I needed. And now, when I started out, there was none of Bredesen's books were published yet, and my book came out before his book.
Yeah.
And so now, I mean, the average guy starting out, if you spend the money to buy 2 of his books, just the first one and the second one, you don't even have to buy the third one. You've got everything you need to know.
Yeah.
Some of it gets a little scientific, which is really difficult for me. I mean, I'm science averse, but there's, right now they pretty much, you've got everything you need.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just keep track of your blood levels,
That's it.
and not you don't have to pay somebody hundreds and hundreds of dollars a month to cheer you along the way.
That's right. All right.
Now maybe I'm giving coaches a bad rap, but I've never had one, so I'm not sure exactly what they do. But I know that I succeeded without one.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I mean, I think you said it. I mean, that was really powerful, to have someone in your life, who loves you with all their heart and takes the time to really understand the protocol and help you implement it step by step and stay on you in a loving way. Yeah, it's definitely a teamwork, and we've learned that, on our end too. So, um,
I
it's
told you yesterday, your father's a very lucky guy.
yeah,
He's a very lucky guy.
appreciate
Take
that.
that in.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot. Yeah, well, my parents, they made sacrifices, and you got to be there for them when things like this happen. So I'm grateful for them, and I'm really grateful for you taking the time with us. You know, before we hop off here, because I know, hey, you've got things to do, and I appreciate you taking the time with us. But you got to tell me, I mean, you really seem to have this special resolve. You really seem to have been a determined person. Um, for really the majority of your life, from everything I've read about you, and going through what you went through being Pat's caretaker, and then with the business, and then getting the diagnosis, throwing your hands up, then finding Bredesen, then having the gumption to go out in 6, 7 months, seek him out. Where where does that come from? Where do you think that level of motivation
I
and
don't know.
determination comes from?
My friends tell me I'm very tenacious. I don't know if that's an insult or a compliment, but when my book was ready to be published, I didn't want to publish it without Dr. Bredesen taking a look at it first. And I was hoping that he would leave me a review, which he did, and he left me a great review. Uh, but I lost contact with him for like over a year. He changed all his email addresses. I guess he was just getting inundated. But I didn't give up. I kept trying to get a hold of him, A couple of my friends said, just publish the book. Just publish the book. And I went through it. I don't know. My parents taught me that if you can visualize something, you can do it if it's good for you. You can do it if it's bad for you.
Yeah.
and I watched them. They were entrepreneurs, and they created a newspaper out of nothing, and no advertisers, no printer, no nothing. And within 6 weeks, they had a newspaper full of advertisements before the paper even came out, and it's still being published like 60 years later. So,
Wow.
60, yeah, 60. They don't own it anymore, but it's still coming out every week.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm lucky. I don't know. I guess I'm lucky.
I mean, there's definitely some determination. There's a lot of indomitable will in there, and we can all learn from that. You're an inspiration in that regard, and um, we can all take that in. It's definitely a muscle we can all train, especially with something like this, and especially with so many. What I've heard is in neurology, there's this kind of there's this term diagnose and adios, and we definitely got that, and you didn't get the greatest news, and there's a lot of people who unfortunately, I've gotten the call from other people who've gotten the diagnosis and say, what do we do? And it's a tough hit to take, um, but definitely having someone like you write a book and then do an interview like this and set that example, it helps people definitely get into a different mindset to take this on a different way. So thank you for that. And my last question for you, Frank, is, for anyone out there who they've heard about the protocol, or they're just hearing about it right now, but they're skeptical, and maybe even the neurologist has said, and this is something that our neurologist said, is they said, hey, this is something that's brand new. It may not work, and you're going to waste all this time and potentially money, and you have no guarantee. I mean, for somebody who has some skepticism and some reservations, what would you tell them?
Uh, I would say that you need to know if you're listening to this interview and you're worried about your own cognition. I want you to know that mine didn't happen overnight. It came up gradually, bit by bit by bit. But when it got bad, it got really bad, really fast.
Yeah.
And one thing Bredesen is very clear about: the earliest you start trying to treat this stuff, the more likely you are of a positive outcome. And the other thing I just want to say, in regards to your other question, why was I so tenacious about this? When your brain and your life are on the line, it can be an inspiration to get off your ass and do what you can do. And I was just lucky that I ran into the information by accident. By accident. Like when I moved to Mexico, so we could have round the clock care for me. Not that I was going to run off to California and find out that I could change my whole life.
Yeah.
So if you're skeptical, it doesn't cost that much to change your lifestyle. You start where you can start. Dr. Bredesen says that all the time. Start where you can start. Can you exercise a little bit more? Can you take a little stress off your load? Little things like that. Try itty bitty bitty to start eating better, and see if you don't notice a change.
Yeah.
And my wish for everybody on this interview is that you have the same outcome that I did. And as I say that, I know it's likely that not everybody will. But if you jump on it quick, your odds are infinitely better than if you just postpone and wait, because it's progressing day by day, hour by hour, every day God sends.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
so there.
That's it. That's great. That's a great way to close it out. And no, I mean, what you're talking about there is so important. And the way I look at it is the more of us join the protocol, I'm doing the protocol myself for prevention. And so is my wife. And, the more of us that join the protocol, it also helps all of us because it gives Bredesen and his team more data to work with, and the more data they have, uh, the faster the insights can be gained, and it benefits all of us. So, yeah, this has been great, Frank. Thank you so much for taking this time, for sharing your story. I know it's not the most comfortable story to share, but and also, you know, I know it's something that we've been working to put together for a while here, and I'm so grateful that we were able to get it done. Thank you for sharing everything with our listeners, and yeah, you're an inspiration to all of us. So keep going, and I'm sure we'll be speaking soon. Thanks, Frank.
All right. Thanks, Eddie. I'm glad you asked me. It's been a pleasure to be on here. And let's hook something up with your dad, huh?
Let's do it. All right.
All right. Thanks
Thanks,
again.
Frank.